It was just another day at the precinct until the doors burst open. A black woman, no different from the rest, stepped in. But her presence, her authority left everyone frozen in disbelief. Just hours earlier, she'd been violently assaulted by two cops who mocked her, belittled her, and showed their true colors. They didn't know who she was. But the moment they did, their arrogance vanished. How could they possibly face the woman they had humiliated, knowing she was now in charge? This is the story of that moment and how everything changed. Keep watching, because what happens next is nothing short of shocking. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. Tasha Reynolds was used to the quiet hum of her early mornings. She had always loved the solitude of the dawn, when the world felt still and manageable. A seasoned officer with 10 years under her belt, Tasha had seen her share of struggles both in the field and in her personal life. But that morning was different. It wasn't just any routine shift at the precinct. She had just received her promotion, the one she had worked tirelessly for. Today, she was officially the new police captain. Tasha had fought harder than most to reach this point. She had faced skepticism, quiet whispers in the halls, and the constant pressure of proving herself in a world where her skin color was still seen as a barrier rather than a badge of honor. But none of that mattered now. She had earned her place, and she was proud of it. The city's diverse community, with its challenges and dreams, was her passion. And with this promotion, she was determined to make a difference. But as she walked into the precinct that morning, a flicker of unease crept into her chest. The atmosphere felt off, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Officers gave her polite nods, but the energy in the room was cold. She had learned to read the undercurrents of people's behavior. And today, something wasn't right. Tasha brushed it off, focused on the tasks ahead. She had a full day of briefings and meetings to get through. But as she entered the captain's office, she found a message pinned to her desk. It was from the night shift. Two officers had requested a meeting. She didn't know them well, but their names were familiar enough. Little did Tasha know, those two officers were about to make her face the very thing she had worked so hard to overcome. And beknownst to her, the meeting was already in motion. They had plans of their own, plans that would test not just her patience but everything she had fought for. The storm was coming, and it was only a matter of time before everything unraveled. The tension simmered just beneath the surface, like an approaching thunderstorm, and Tasha would soon learn how deep the bias ran within the precinct she had so proudly joined. But would she be ready for what was coming next? Tasha stepped into the precinct with a quiet resolve, her mind focused on the day ahead. It had been a long road to get here. Now, as the newly appointed police captain, she was determined to push past any obstacles. But nothing had prepared her for the undercurrent of tension that seemed to pulse through the air as she walked past her colleagues. The first sign that something was off came during the morning briefing. Tasha walked into the room, expecting the usual wave of respectful nods. Instead, she was met with stony silence. The officers shuffled in their seats, exchanging uncomfortable glances. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, some uncertain, others skeptical. They knew who she was, but perhaps they didn't truly know her yet. Her instincts, honed over years of walking the thin line between being an authority figure and a team player, told her something was wrong. She ignored it. She had no time for distractions. Her promotion wasn't a fluke. She had earned it with blood, sweat, and countless sacrifices. She'd earned the respect of this department the hard way. They'd see it soon enough. But as the briefing went on, her sense of unease grew. Officer Bradshaw, a senior member known for his traditional views, started speaking over her more than usual. Each word that left his mouth felt like a challenge. Not a challenge to her intelligence, but to her very presence in the room. He was condescending, dismissive. And yet, he was a seasoned officer, a man who'd been with the force for 20 years. "I just think," Bradshaw said, his tone dripping with an edge of impatience, "that we should follow the same procedures we've always had. New policies might not fit with how things run around here." Tasha glanced around the room. Some officers nodded in agreement. It wasn't just Bradshaw, there were others too. She could feel the collective unease building, thickening the air in the room. They weren't rejecting the policy, they were rejecting her. Her hand tightened around the pen she had been tapping on the table. She cleared her throat, ready to assert her authority. What we're discussing here isn't just about policies, she said, her voice steady. It's about doing what's best for the community we serve. And that means we adapt to changing times. Not all change is bad. This department needs to evolve, and I'm here to lead it in that direction. But instead of rallying behind her, the room only grew colder. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of unease, with more passive-aggressive comments, thinly veiled disapproval, and challenges to her leadership. Tasha's stomach twisted with the realization that the resistance wasn't just from Bradshaw, it was from nearly everyone in the room. They hadn't accepted her yet. She wasn't one of them. Not in their eyes. After the meeting, Tasha retreated to her office, the door closing with a soft click behind her. Her pulse was racing. She ran her hands through her hair, exhaling slowly. The tension that had been simmering all morning was now boiling over. Was this what her new reality would be like? A constant battle to prove she belonged. Before she could gather her thoughts, there was a knock on her door. "Captain." The voice was familiar. Officer Garcia, a junior officer she had mentored early in her career. He was always respectful, always professional. But today, there was something in his eyes that made her pause. He looked nervous, almost scared. "Come in, Garcia," Tasha called, gesturing to the chair across from her. He stepped inside, hesitating just for a moment before taking a seat. "There's something you need to know," he said, his voice low. "Bradshaw and a few others, they've been talking behind your back. They don't think you're fit to be captain. They're questioning your authority. They've even talked about trying to get you removed." Tasha's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected it, but hearing it out loud made it feel real. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on her chest. These weren't just officers she worked with, they were colleagues she had stood side by side with during the toughest moments. She had thought that, at least in the field, they had respected her. "Are they planning anything?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that surprised even her. Garcia shook his head. "Not yet, but I heard them talking about teaching you a lesson. They're not used to having someone like you in charge." Tasha swallowed the bitterness rising in her throat. She knew she couldn't let this fester, but the thought of them undermining her, refusing to accept her, cut deeper than anything she had ever faced on the job. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with a new message. The words on the screen sent a chill down her spine. "Meeting at 2 p.m. Be prepared." Tasha froze. The message was from Bradshaw. She couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting wasn't about work, it was about her. And whatever happened next, it was going to be personal. By 2 p.m., the tension in the precinct had reached a boiling point. Tasha walked into the break room, her posture strong, but her mind racing. There were murmurs as the officers gathered around, glancing at her with a mixture of discomfort and defiance. Bradshaw was the first to speak. "Captain," he said, his voice laced with barely disguised sarcasm, "we've been discussing some of your recent decisions. The changes you've been pushing for. Well, they're not exactly sitting well with the team. Some of us feel you're out of touch with how things are run around here." Tasha's pulse quickened. "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make this department better. You might not like the changes, but they're necessary. This department needs to serve everyone, not just those who fit into a certain mold." There was a brief silence, and then Bradshaw's voice grew louder. "You think you're the first one to come in here and tell us what to do? You're not. You're just another one who thinks they know better." The officers gathered around shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking to each other. Tasha could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down on her. This wasn't just about policies anymore, it was about who they believed she was. And in their eyes, she was nothing but a token, a black woman who had been handed power she didn't deserve. Just then, the door swung open, and in walked Officer Thompson, a member of the force she hadn't seen in weeks. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. She wasn't supposed to be part of this meeting, but she knew something was about to go down. "Captain, you need to know there's something serious happening. It's not just the department." The room fell silent. Everyone turned to her, but Tasha wasn't sure if it was because they finally saw her as the authority figure they needed or if they were waiting for her to fail. But before she could respond, the door crashed open again. Two officers stepped into the room, the smug smiles on their faces now replaced with wide-eyed terror. "What's wrong?" Tasha demanded, her heart pounding. But they could only stare at her, unable to speak. "She knows," Garcia whispered. She knows. The atmosphere in the room shifted. A storm was brewing, one that Tasha hadn't anticipated, but one that would change everything in the department. What she didn't know yet was how much this moment would reveal about the lengths people would go to in order to protect their own biases and how far they were willing to push her before she cracked. And as the seconds ticked by, Tasha knew it was no longer about proving herself to them. It was about proving to herself what she was truly capable of. Would she bend under their pressure, or would she finally break the chains that bound her? The answer was coming, and it was going to change everything. The tension in the room was unbearable. The officers who had once looked down on her were now standing in front of her, and sure of their next move. The entire precinct had turned into a powder keg, ready to explode. Tasha could feel the heat of their gaze, the judgment in their eyes as they looked at her, questioning her every step. The meeting had been escalating for minutes. Bradshaw had launched into another tirade, mocking her leadership, questioning her decisions, and undermining her every move. His words, sharp as daggers, cut through the air. "You really think you belong here, don't you?" he sneered. "You think you can come in here, disrupt everything, and make us follow your rules? You're nothing but a token, just a diversity hire. You'll never fit in." Her heart raced, but her eyes stayed cold. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to break her. It wasn't even the worst. Tasha had fought this battle in her mind for years. She had prepared for the day they would try to tear her down. But nothing, not even the most insulting words, could break her now. She stood up, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. The room went silent. It was a power move, and it was all she needed. The quiet was deafening, like the calm before a storm. Bradshaw's smug expression faltered, his confidence slipping for the first time since the meeting had begun. "You think this is about me?" Tasha's voice was calm, but there was fire beneath it. "This isn't about me. This is about the people we're supposed to serve, the people you've been failing, the people you've been ignoring. For too long, this department has been about power, control, and who can make the loudest noise in the room. I'm done playing that game." Bradshaw opened his mouth to speak, but Tasha cut him off, her voice rising with authority. "You don't get to question my place here. I've earned it, and you will respect me." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything she had endured. For a moment, no one moved. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. But then, it happened. Bradshaw, unable to hold onto his bravado any longer, stepped toward her. "You think you can scare me?" he sneered, his face twisted with disdain. "You'll never be one of us. You'll always be the outsider." The room was on edge, the officers split between the tension and the anticipation of what would come next. Garcia, who had been standing by the door, suddenly stepped forward, his face pale. "Tasha," he said quietly, but there was an urgency in his voice. They know. They know about your promotion." Tasha's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Before Garcia could speak, Bradshaw's voice rang out again, louder this time. "I know all about your little secret." He spat, his words dripping with venom. "You think we didn't see it? The whole department is talking, Tasha. The whole city knows. They're just waiting for you to fail, to fall flat on your face. You're not ready. You'll never be ready." But as Bradshaw continued his tirade, something changed. A sound came from the hallway, a knock on the door. It was soft at first, but then louder, more insistent. Everyone turned their heads. Tasha's eyes widened as the door swung open, and in walked someone who made everyone freeze. A senior officer from the city council. The one who had personally overseen Tasha's promotion. The one who had been silent, hidden in the shadows. His presence in the room now was not just a surprise, it was the twist that would change everything. "Actually," the officer said, his voice calm but filled with authority, "I think it's time you all learned the truth." The room went completely silent. Bradshaw's smug expression faded, replaced by something far more uncomfortable: fear. He knew what was coming, and so did Tasha. The officer walked toward Tasha, standing beside her. "You see," he continued, his gaze scanning the room, "the city council has been watching very closely. There have been complaints about this precinct's behavior, about the lack of respect, the undercurrent of racism, the reluctance to accept change. We're here to make sure the right people are in power, and we believe Tasha is the right person. She's the future of this department, whether you like it or not." The words hit like a bombshell. It was the kind of revelation that knocked the wind out of everyone. The city council had been keeping track of every officer's actions, every complaint. They knew. They had been watching all along. Bradshaw's face twisted in anger, but there was fear behind his eyes now. His attempts to undermine Tasha weren't just a battle for respect anymore. They were a fight against the system itself. The system had decided, and it wasn't in his favor. Tasha stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. She had been called a token, belittled, and insulted. But in this moment, she had been vindicated. The power she had fought so hard for was hers, and no one could take it from her. The officer turned to the rest of the room, his voice firm. If anyone here feels they can't accept this change, or if they have issues with how this department is being run, then perhaps it's time for them to find a new line of work. The shock was palpable. Bradshaw took a step back, his face turning crimson. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Tasha looked around the room, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger, relief, and triumph. The officers who had once whispered behind her back now avoided her gaze. They knew the truth. They knew they had been wrong, but Tasha wasn't finished yet. As the room continued to simmer with unease, she stepped forward, her voice calm but powerful. "This is just the beginning," she said, her eyes sweeping over each officer in the room. "I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make a change. And if you can't get on board with that, then I suggest you start looking for a new job." As her words hung in the air, the weight of the moment settled in. Tasha had delivered the final blow, not just to Bradshaw's arrogance, but to the systemic racism that had been festering in the precinct for so long. It wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for every officer who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or silenced. But even as she stood there, feeling the rush of triumph, a new question loomed in her mind. Would this be enough to change everything? Or was this just the beginning of an even bigger fight? The days following the confrontation at the precinct were a blur of activity. Tasha had done what she never thought she would need to. She had fought for her place, not just as a leader, but as a person who deserved to be where she was. But the aftermath of the storm she'd stirred was far from over. As soon as the meeting ended, the ripple effects began. Bradshaw, once the most vocal critic of Tasha's appointment, found himself isolated. His allies, the few who had supported him in the past, began to fall away. It wasn't just because the city council had stepped in, no, it was the glaring truth that he couldn't deny anymore. He had tried to tear down a woman who had earned her seat at the table, and the consequences of that attempt were now clear. Tasha's office was quiet that morning. She was alone, reflecting on the whirlwind of emotions that had flooded her in those final moments. The relief of standing up for herself was still fresh, but something deeper stirred inside her. The journey ahead was bigger than just reclaiming her power. It was about dismantling a system that had kept so many like her from rising. The precinct was different now. The tension was still there, but it had shifted. The officers who had once looked at her with disdain now met her eyes with a kind of wary respect. Some, like Garcia, had already begun to change their mindset. He approached her office that afternoon with a tentative smile. "I think we can finally make this place work," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I've been talking with some of the others, and I think we can all learn something here. You've shown us that leadership isn't about fitting a mold. It's about doing what's right for the people we serve." Tasha nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She had expected resistance, but hearing this acknowledgement felt like a small victory in itself. It wasn't about the applause, it was about knowing that her actions had planted seeds of change in others, even those who had initially doubted her. However, Bradshaw's downfall wasn't the end of the story. The disciplinary hearing came swiftly. As the investigation into his conduct unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a personal vendetta against Tasha, it was part of a much larger pattern of discrimination within the precinct. His actions, once written off as isolated incidents, were now part of a deeply embedded issue that needed addressing. The department was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Racism, even when hidden behind professional facades, was still rampant in many of its practices.